Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 330 featuring Patrick Osborne, the incredible animator, writer, and director, nominated for 2 Oscars, winner of one of them. Incredible guy, really sweet guy. With a very amazing creative past and present and future as well. Kristen, what did you think of Patrick?
Oh, I love this podcast. I was saying, like Spider-Man, a 3D spider sparked his career. That was a fun story. But we get to hear about his adventures in Hollywood and what it takes to be a director and not the so fun things to make it. But kind of when he was little, he was immersed in the movie industry with his dad working at Kenner Toys, from seeing all the movie merchandising. And it was just fun to hear about that. And then his story of his Oscar-winning short film Feast while I was at Disney. So yeah, it was all so many good things.
It was really cool. I should note that I got in touch with Patrick through Jean-Michel over at the Real Time Conference. So it's very nice to, being part of that conference. It was very nice to be have access to all these great speakers, and it was really cool to be able to have Patrick on as well. So I'm really happy to do that. I really love the story of his past and his dad being part of Kenner Toys, because I don't think his dad, the way he was talking about it, his dad doesn't necessarily know the importance of the toys that he made culturally on there. He made designed some of the original Star Wars toys, but it wasn't he didn't necessarily know back then how important they're going to be today. So it was kind of cool to see that. And, obviously Patrick's a very creative person. His shorts are really beautiful. Feast was a great short. And the Pearl was also really great. So he's doing amazing things, and I was really glad to see that and to be able to talk to him. So it was a wonderful podcast. All right, Kristen, we have a couple of announcements. What's going on?
Yep, just a few. We've talked about these before. You can find these out at chaos.com/events. The one we have coming up is on June 18th. This will be an online event, and it is introducing Chaos Vantage in Chaos Cosmos, and it'll be a webinar and demo. So you can log on.
Perfect. So if you guys are interested in Cosmos and Vantage and want to know more about that, I definitely recommend you guys go check it out. Chaos.com/events again is where all that information is and where you can register to find out more again. And that's June 18th. We have a couple of new products as well that are coming up. The big one I think that you guys should check out, speaking of Vantage, is the new Vantage update, which is 1.3. Lots of new stuff going on there. I think it's a good thing to check out. I've been using it and I am very impressed, honestly speaking. The new 2-sided material is cool, and a bunch of other cool new features, a new camera importer, lots of cool stuff going on in Vantage. So very exciting to see that. If people want to know more about the podcast, where can they go, Kristen?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. Or if you'd like to watch us on YouTube, you can go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Great. And if you have any ideas about the podcast, or you have any feedback or want to let us know, please do. Our email is labs@chaosgroup.com, and we would love to hear more from you. We actually do get some great suggestions and emails, so please let us know, and we will try to see if we can get in touch with those people, or if you have contact, give us those contact information. I would love to know about that. And of course, don't forget to review us on Apple Podcast, always something that's good to know, and share us with all of your friends and family. And that's it. All right. That being said, please enjoy this amazing podcast with Mr. Patrick Osborne.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Well, cool. Listen, this has been great. I'm so glad that, through Jean-Michel, we were able to get this all going and talk about some real-time cool stuff. Like you mentioned, you've got a bunch of gear behind you. So obviously you're kind of a gearhead in your own way. But what sort of got you into CG and then animation more specifically? What was your passion there?
Yeah, I think I'll start with when I was a kid. I So my dad was the director of design of Kenner Toys in Cincinnati, Ohio. So
really?
He
the
he
famous
was there.
Kenner Toys Star Wars.
Yes. Yeah, and he was an industrial designer. He went to University of Cincinnati, and which has a great design program still for especially for products and like cars and you know, Procter and Gamble is there, so there's a lot of like that kind of stuff too that happens in Cincinnati. But in the 80s or 70s and 80s, Kenner was a big creative, place there in that city. And my dad started working there right out of school in the early 70s and was there for his first toy was the bionic mission vehicle for the $6 Million Man. And then he worked on the first, the entire line of Star Wars toys the whole time they did it, along with Care Bears and Strawberry Shortcake and Mask. And they had a bunch of really cool creative toys too, like Spirograph and Play-Doh. And so it was always as a kid, I was a model on Care Bears boxes and stuff. And I have photos of that. It's on my Instagram.
Nice.
And but my dad liked to draw a lot. He was also into racing. We lived close to the Indianapolis Speedway, like within an hour and a half. So he did he loved classic cars and would do watercolors of cars and did the cover of the Indianapolis race program a couple times, like watercolors of the race cars. And he was on the pit crew for that kind of stuff. So he was always like someone who loved to draw, especially cars and vehicles. And as a kid, I had all of those, I was getting into his Prismacolor marker set and pencils and would draw with my dad. And I think that, encouragement of parents that my mom and dad actually met in art school. So my mom is a painter as well. So like it was definitely in our family to draw and paint. And, so there was that in me. And then when I was, like 1986 or so, I got a Nintendo like every other kid in this generation and kind of fell in love with video games and knew through high school and growing up that I wanted to do something with drawing and maybe make games or movies or something. And then I think like a lot of people on your podcast, I saw Jurassic Park and not only that, but like the book. I saw my dad had the making of book with the storyboards in it. And to see that it was kind of crafted by humans in that way, but also really high tech and computery. It was clearly a cross section of things I was into. And I think it sounds like from listening to a few of your interviews that it's fairly common. Like Jurassic Park seems to be a kind of huge thing. One other thing is that Kenner was bought by Hasbro in 1992, a little bit before Jurassic Park came out, but they were working on, I read the script for Men in Black early on, that they were kind of doing toys for. My dad was doing toys for. I remember like reading, that was the first script I've ever read, and to read a script and then go see a movie like 3 years later was a neat kind of thing that I realized, someone's like writing this and someone's drawing the story, but like there's clearly a lot of human creative work to be done in here. And I think the third thing was meeting, Kenner had an early Alias machine, like a 1989 version of Alias before it was Maya or Power Animator or anything like that. And I thought that was it was like the coolest video game ever, like $100,000 3D video game before 1990. They had a little like thing where you had a mouse and it was a 3D spider that would like follow the mouse around was their demo, and it was real time. And I remember that one. That stuck with me. Seeing that at Kenner Toys when I was like 8 or something like that. So that, and then also one of my dad introduced me to a guy named Ed Zobrist, also growing up, and he was a marketing, a young marketing guy at Kenner, but he ended up leaving the toy business and joining EA in the middle of the 80s. And he now is one of the very high up executives at Epic Games. And I've kept in touch with Ed. I've run into him over the last 30 years a couple times. So all that stuff was kind of in my world and possibility. And then out of high school, I had the support, was lucky enough to have the support to go to Ringling to art school, which
nice.
looking back on that now, it was great, but art school is a huge gamble. You don't kind of consider that as a kid who's passionate and, in the dream and believes they can do it, but it is, it's difficult, to make it work out of art school. That the percentages are low, So, and I don't know if that's the way I would recommend doing it now necessarily. I think there are some schools that are amazing and a lot of kids get a lot out of them, but there's so many cool animation mentor style training programs, that are fantastic too, and have just as much success, if not more. But Midwest path in the late 90s was go to college. That was the expected way to go. So, but out of Ringling, I got into figure drawing and painting. It's kind of fashionable at art schools to, learn from the masters in that way. And it's great to do, I think. So, and I still love doing that. And, and then, but I got into the computer animation there with, Jim McCampbell as the head, and he still is the head. And he was, kind of the lineage of Ohio State. Ohio State had an amazing computer graphics program in the 80s and into the 90s. And that kind of, some of that trickled into Ringling and made it what it is, as a more art-centered and less computer science-centered program. And I've since worked, ended up working at Blue Sky recently, which was created by those Ohio State people in a lot of ways too. So it's neat to see all that stuff kind of cross a little bit. But I made a short film in college, like we all did, and mainly as a reel. And I started working.
Was it a live action or was it animation?
Animated. They only had an animation program at that time. Now they have live action too, and games. But at that point, it was 30 people per class. It was a small class. And you did a year of traditional 2D paper animation, and then in 3 years of learning Maya version 2, and Shake was our comp stuff, which I loved at the time, and I still feel like that node-based thinking way back then was pretty cool and ahead of its time, and it's everywhere now. But so I got into that stuff, and then the reel was good enough to, I find like that luck has a lot to do with things along the way, but like I was lucky enough to graduate when there was a huge vacuum into the industry, as animation studios were deciding to do features and opening up bigger. And I got pulled into Sony Imageworks during Polar Express and Spider-Man 2 time. Very, a lot of vacuum, and all of the people that ended up working with on Polar Express ended up being image movers, after that. So, it was a nice time to get in. Polar Express was a very ambitious thing for 2002. It was difficult to work on, artistically, but I met a lot of wonderful people working on there. My first boss, David Schaub, the animation director of that, is wonderful. He's an awesome guy. And I met Renato Dos Anjos, who is one of the animation supervisors or heads of animation at Disney right now, and has been for a long time. So you meet, I met tons of amazing people there, and everybody kind of went everywhere. But I stayed at Sony through Open Season, Surf's Up, and then I Am Legend.
I was there at that time too.
Oh yeah, cool.
I was on Ghost Rider.
Oh yeah, with Marco Marenghi.
Lighting.
Great, yeah.
Yeah.
That was like a cool,
Kevin Mack.
Yeah, that was like a cool, that was a little bit of a rogue team. The Ghost Rider team was small, I remember, and
very small.
But a few, there are some awesome animators on that I still keep in touch with a little bit. But yeah, like after I Am Legend, Disney had bought Pixar a couple years before, and had some friends over at Disney Animation that said that it was going to be really cool to be there, as Lasseter and Ed Catmull started to kind of, change leadership, and they were definitely right. So I went over there for what I thought was American Dog, and it turned out to be Bolt. because that whole movie got kind of shuffled at the beginning there, but it was a really awesome time to get into that studio because it had a lot to prove. I think a lot of people thought, Disney doesn't need 2 animation studios. Why not? Why would they have Disney Animation when they have Pixar if they're all going to do CG? But we felt like there was some real talent there, and it was really exciting to kind of ground floor Disney at that point because it felt like a rebuild for sure. And then and those movies like Bolt and Tangled and Into Wreck-It Ralph in the Prep and Landing specials were really, really fun to work on. So I was an animator through those. I was an animator on all this stuff. So it was great to be there at that time. And then the Tangled was kind of the highlight of that phase of my like animation career because it was working with Clay Cadis and John Kars and Glenn Keane as our leadership. And Glenn is obviously an animation legend and a wonderful human being to work with. He's very generous, and John and Clay are geniuses. So it was a really cool, mix of people and a small crew. Like 55 animators is pretty small for a movie these days. Yeah. And we were doing something we felt was really, really unique in how we were crafting the performance of that movie that I think was kind of the birth of what the Disney style is now in 3D. So that was all super awesome. And Glenn would draw over he would sit down with you for like 3 or 4 hours and just draw on the Cintiq over your poses and your shots and talk about how they could be better and how you would see him like get into the character and kind of perform there through the pencil, and all of that was pretty amazing to like just sit and watch for 3 hours at work one day. So it was a pretty awesome experience. So that's how I got into all of it. And then after that, I kind of stopped animating, but I mean, I still do, but as a main job, that was kind of the end of that. But
why did you stop animating?
I started directing. I started making my own stuff and supervising, but like I mean, I love actually animating. I love doing everything. That's one of the the kind of like the curses of our business is that you can't. It's very much the blessing and the curse. It's like great that it's such a team effort, but you really can't do it all yourself. And I do enjoy doing. I play music. I like to draw. I like to animate. I like to paint. I enjoy all of the steps of making a film. You don't get to do all of that when you're trying to get things bigger made. But I do get to dabble in each of it. And I actually think that, I'm pretty good as a character animator. I think the rest of the stuff I'm like campfire level, as in campfire guitarist, I can play a few songs, entertain people enough, but like I'm not amazing at any of the other things. And I think that's what directing kind of is, that it's like recognizing what your biggest strengths are and trying to find people to help to do all the other stuff that you're not as good at. So,
right.
But basically after Tangled happened, we did a couple of these Prep and Landing shorts, these 30-minute Christmas specials for ABC at Disney, as other movies, as Wreck-It Ralph and Snow Queen, were in development. Mm-hmm. And at the as Wreck-It Ralph was kind of ramping up, John Kars asked John Lasseter if he could revive a short that he was working on at Pixar called Paperman. And right around that time, Disney had started like dabbling in Google's 20% time thing, where you could like spend 20% of your year doing whatever you want. It was fashionable around 2011. And they allowed us to kind of gather a group of animators together and create do something that excites you for a month of your time. So 5 weeks of time for each person that you wanted to convince to do this. So we made a little like fake teaser for a movie called Pet about a kid who like raised a sea monster in his backyard pool. And we made like a teaser, we made it stereo, and it was all viewport Maya shaded. It was not like we didn't go through the render process at all. We just kind of composite tricked it. And just to make it quick, that's where I started. There was an artist working upstairs named Jeff Turley that I loved some of his paintings on Tangled. So I asked him to come and like do paintings for it, and he did. And got a bunch of animator friends together. The music department even like did a little score for it. And we showed it. The deal of the program, which was called Spark at the time, was that you just had to show it to the studio when you were done. That was the only stakes. Like you had to stand by what you were doing on a presentation. So we did. Everybody got really excited and thought we were like making a movie, but it wasn't. It was just a teaser. But what came from that is the ability to play around in this non-photo real time, kind of do things that look a little bit different space at Disney. And Ron and John had an idea that they were working on before Moana that was going to use this technology. They ended up not being able to do that one, but we did a little test for that. And we started working with the software called Meander, which was a drawing tool, a vector drawing tool that was initially meant to make auto in-betweens for effects drawings because they were so tedious to do. Made by this engineer named Brian Whited. And he made this tool where you could like draw a drawing and then draw another one, and it would do the in-betweens for you with arcs. Like you could like time it and add like arcs to it. It was really cool. We basically kind of took that tool, took John Carr's story for Paperman, took that Meander tool and what we had been doing on this pet test, me and Jeff Turley, the art director, and combine that into a new tool that would allow you to trace over CG animation and then use the arcs and the motion vectors of the animation to suggest where automatic in-betweens were going to go on complicated paintings. And so on Paperman, on like an 800 frame shot, you only had to do 70 or 80 nice drawings instead of 800. Mm-hmm. And it was at 24 frames a second and very polished and tight, and CG animation in some ways is easier to direct. It's more forgiving than 2D. So we got to like kind of make software to do our film, and it was enough of a hit. It won the Oscar. Nice. So it was nice to get to make shorts. I kind of got addicted to making shorts, and then it was all hand. It was mostly drawn. It's CG underneath, but all of the image you see is drawn. Yeah.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
It's and there are a couple YouTube videos that like show how it works. And it was really fun to work on because we made the tool 100% to our own personal specs. And it's great to make a tool that you make from scratch like that with the software developer like in the next room because you know it so well. And and whenever it crashed, it just had Brian's phone number that came up and it said Brian failed and it had his phone number and it has okay. And you could call him. And it was great to be able to like do that was addicting, to be honest.
And so this was for Feast.
That was for Paperman. We made that.
Paperman. Okay, right.
Yeah. And then Feast, we used it too, but Paperman was entirely made that way. Feast was a combination of 3D and drawn effects and a little more compositing trickery, than that. But after Paperman, I went on to with the animator named Zach Parrish to be the heads of animation on Big Hero 6. And I did that for a year. Me and Zach worked on Baymax mainly. Like I was soft Baymax and Zach was hard Baymax and some of the other characters. And I spent a year getting that off the ground. But right around Christmas time, Lasseter decided that he wanted to make more shorts with Disney Animation. He was going to open up the pitch program. And I'm the kind of person who like always says yes to that stuff. I just like trying it. The whole rule was that you had to have 3 ideas and there was a web form. And I remember like like looking through a few sketchbooks. I'm like, maybe these are some ideas. I'm going to type them in. So I typed in 3 titles, didn't know what they were really. And hit send and sent an email to development, I guess. And I got an email back like 20 minutes later saying, hey, can you pitch these on Tuesday to us? And I was like, oh, I don't know what they are. Oh, crap. So I had no idea what the stories were going to be. One of them ended up changing entirely. I just renamed it and said, and it turns out like with all of these things, there's never really rules like that. Like pitching to studios, pitching internal, none of that stuff has like, they put rules in place to try to like give some structure to it. But if you're going to be creative, you're going to be creative. So, I was able to like push the meeting back. And then as I've learned since, like development meetings get pushed months sometimes. So like if you push it a week, you can put, it doesn't really matter, that stuff. So that, but I had this idea for a live action film. I go to South by Southwest every year, or try to, not this year, obviously, but, I had seen, like, I feel like good ideas for stories are, if they're going to be personal and like they have to be able to spend so much time on them. And if they're going to be interesting, they have to come from like 2 or 3, a cross section of like 2 or 3 things that you find really interesting and love. And I think so I kind of keep track of things I love. I have a lot of like Twitter bookmarks and YouTube, playlists and stuff that are like, that I think these things are amazing. I don't know what this is going to end up being. And I also keep sketchbooks. So what Feast ended up being was a combination of this app I was beta testing called 1 Second Every Day, where you do a video calendar of your life. Yeah. So I was doing that at work. Paperman has a 1 second every day of the entire production. And I recorded a 1 second every day of every dinner I had in 2012. And I thought it was really fascinating how you could like see life pass by through the dinner table with the meal in the center, or something kind of cool and graphic about that. At South by Southwest, I saw a show by a guy named Willie Mason, and he sang a song called Where the Humans Eat about his cat, like wanting to be at their table and be human like them. And then I've been playing around with the Paperman style and like non-photorealistic stuff. So I was like, well, what if I like told a love story or a relationship story through dinner, but the only character you really see is the dog under the table, like just wanting to be apart. I was like, that seems kind of cool. And then the baby, there's all kinds of life moments that happen around dinner that could include the dog in a cute way. And I showed that. I said that to Lasseter. I showed him my video of dinners. I said I wanted to make it non-photoreal with Jeff Turley as the art director. And I would love to say he said yes right away, but he's like, that sounds very great. Sounds interesting. All right, we'll talk to you later. And then like 2 months later, they said yes. So it took a long time to like, it was just like radio silence for a while. But at that moment, I had to walk back into the office with Zach and say, Zach, you're going to have to do Big Hero 6 by yourself because I am not going to turn this down. And then a year later, it played in Annecy. So it took a year from like the green light day to Annecy Festival. But
wow,
which is amazing. The biggest stressor was around Christmas. I ran out of storyboard artist time, and I'd never done story myself at this point. And Lasseter had his big note before Christmas was like, doesn't feel special enough. Your whole pitch was really cool and special and unique, and this feels like, oh, it's fine. And I'm like, oh my God, like that's a terrible.
Make it more special.
Difficult. Yeah, it's an incredibly difficult note. And he's like, just look back at your pitch and what you did and what was cool about that, and like make sure it's in there. And then so the Feast production was a year long for me, and I was on it the more than anyone, the longest. 51 weeks from greenlight to festival, and the most harrowing part was John Lasseter's note around Christmas, which is make or break. We had crew that couldn't make it on January 13th through like April. That was the time when I had like artists, and John's like, it's either going to be good enough to make there or not, or you're not doing it. And his note was that it didn't feel special enough. Like it didn't feel personal or like the pitch. And I think for me, looking back, going like I took a deep breath at that very difficult note to address, and tried to look at what made me excited about the pitch in the first place. And part of it was the cinematography, the storytelling language was food centric physically. Like I always, in the 1 second everyday videos I had made, the meal was always right at the center of the composition. So we decided to make that the way the dog spoke, where like when it was having a good time, it was pushing the food to the center. And when it was like, when he was emotionally like rejected or out of the life, that the food was kind of off center. And it came back into center with the meatball from the baby in the chair at like the moment where everybody has little happy tears. And I feel like kind of finding a way to kind of reconstruct the whole thing, with cinematography telling the story in mind as much as anything else, was what did it. So I went home and reboarded the whole short, like in Ohio. I went home for Christmas to my parents' house. My whole family went, and I spent the whole time in a room redrawing the short to compose it that way and to tighten the story a little bit too. And then he approved it, and we made it. Like animation was like a month, and lighting was like a month and a half after that. Josh Staub, who's an incredible director in his own right, was the VFX soup on that. And we used some of the Meander drawing tool, but we also did a lot of Nuke composite tricks to kind of fight the toon shade nature that typically happen. I hate ugly toon shade on things. Like it's just not, generally the shapes it makes are not very considered. And we tried to find our ways to make toon shade kind of work on top of being able to paint fix it with that motion vector assisted roto. It's kind of how it all works. And that, getting to show it in Annecy is really cool. I've been to Annecy a few times now. It's an amazing place for people who love animation. You're just seeing some of the freshest stuff that you've ever seen there, and it's in a beautiful place, and everybody loves animation. And there's like, the bars are open late. It's all super great place to show your film. And then it came out with Big Hero 6 and did the awards stuff, and it was amazing. And that your life instantly changes, really. Like the ability to kind of meet with anyone in Hollywood is there. You have to make this really difficult choice of like, Disney had at the time 17 directors on staff, all in development. Some people have been in development for like 15 years and never made anything. And I didn't want to do that. I'm a make stuff type of person. And their offer, there was like, storyboard for a while, learn how the story team works. And I just didn't want to like sit around and like kill that outward momentum. So I had to quit, which is a very scary thing. But at Annecy, I had met Karen Dufalo and Jan Pinkova, who were running the Google Spotlight program. So as soon as I quit, I called them and said, "Hey, what are you guys doing right now? Do you have anything that could pay while I try to like get a career going?" And then I learned what having an agent and a manager and what like being a director in Hollywood is really like, which is a lot of driving around LA and meeting like first dates, general meetings with producers and studios and everything to get to know you. And it's a very confusing and complicated and feels like you're working, but you're not working at all kind of situation. And you get a lot of, and my agent Simon, was really good at the beginning at saying like, at making me like realistic about what to expect. He's like, you have a cute film that won a lot of awards. It's a great start, but people aren't going to give you great scripts. You're not going to get the thing that's ready to make now. You're going to get the thing that people kind of like, but needs a lot of work. And you're going to have to like dig in and work with writers and make it happen, in order to get anything that actually gets like anywhere. And he's totally right. Like you get a lot of like, everyone wants to be the next Lego movie. So there's a lot of like, we have this product, we have Slinky, we have Rubik's Cube, we have Play-Doh, we have like every toy company wants their Lego movie. So you get a lot of that. And like everyone gets that. Like if you're an animator who's gone out and wanted to direct stuff, you've definitely gotten a few of these like toys. And maybe you love them enough. I always felt like I had like the dad in to start pitching on those if I really felt like it. But I never really loved those. There was and still is like a graphic novel craze. So you'll get books and graphic novels that people are interested in somewhat. Sometimes, I worked on a movie called Battling Boy for a while, which is an awesome graphic novel. I was the 9th director to try to make that movie. It's owned by Paramount. Paramount, their bosses change every like 7 or 8 months. It feels like it's a very like hard place to make a movie. It's hard to make a movie when the person who is on your side leaves in any situation. So I've kind of learned that like a lot of the actual like job of directing and making stuff is working on that development and trying to make it great and balancing, passion with realism, with the reality of like how likely things are to get made. But you always have to like really have and stick to like a reason to make it. And so I started to get a bunch of things set up, ended up making a sitcom for ABC called Imaginary Mary. That was a really weird and fun experience and a totally different world than what I was used to working at that pace, because shows are made in 4 or 5 weeks. Because we had an animated character, we made every episode in about 7 weeks, which is still incredibly fast for anything with full CG animation in it. And, it ran for 1 season. I think it was fine, wasn't my passion project. And I know that like that tends to actually matter a lot. Like it's hard to spend the time necessary to make something great if you're not completely in love with it. And the big thing that I was doing that whole time was trying to get the feature Nimona off the ground, which I partnered with Roy Lee at Vertigo, who made like It and The Departed, which is very different than an animated movie. But with Stacey Snider and Fox Animation and an executive named Darlene Camano Loquette, who is incredible, and Vanessa, who was running Fox Animation at the time, we got that book rights kind of started and greenlit off of a 4th draft of a script by writer Mark Hames, who wrote Kubo and the Two Strings, and we did 2 storyboard versions, a version and a half, before Vanessa was replaced by Rob Baird and Andrea Maloro, and Fox was bought by Disney. So that sent, and it was going to be made at Blue Sky. And so I was working there. And so
yeah, this
goes many, well, it didn't go great for me. But so basically, I as Spies in Disguise was being worked on, we worked on 6 or so versions of the full screening of that movie until the very first day of COVID. I was fired from that project and moved back to LA after 4.5 years of working on it.
And you were in New York, I guess, right?
Yeah, we moved to Connecticut, to New York City and then Connecticut. And, when the bosses change, and the vision that was bought off on 4 years ago is no longer at the core of the film, it's tough to have that continuing shifting vision. To both be passionate about it and kind of take it in these new directions is always tricky. And to a certain point, the director's the pretty expendable person in the situation, or the changeable thing after a long time. But it was, it was supposed to come out 3 years ago now, and it's still not out. It still has a chance, I think, depending on what Disney wants to do with those projects at Blue Sky. There were some amazing projects in development, and clearly Blue Sky is an incredible team of people that were doing really cool stuff. We made some awesome tests, and there's some versions of the movie that were pretty great. And I have no idea if it'll look like our tests or have anything that I did in it when it's over. But if it ever even comes out. The sad thing about all of that is that Noelle Stevenson, who is the author of the original book and a wonderful showrunner and writer in her own right. You know, that book was written when she was 19 in college. It is incredibly personal to her, and to have that owned by Disney has to be tough. You know, like they can never make anything of their own work. They sold it. So I think that's the tricky thing about, you know, comic books and book rights and movie studios and stuff. Things can literally just be buried. So I hope for Noelle's sake that there's a version that can be out there in the end. I hope so. So we'll see. So after that happened on my last day at Blue Sky was the last day the studio had any people in it, weirdly. So I went home, and then the studio locked down and the country locked down, and we flew back to LA within like 2 weeks, because we're like, if I'm not here for work, I don't know why I'm in Stamford, Connecticut. And even though Stamford's a really nice place, it's very pretty and foresty. And we went back to LA, and I started working on reviving, you know, what other projects I had going on. And in working with Google Spotlight Stories, I did get to work next to Chris O'Reilly and Felix Massey, because they were working on a different one. Chris runs Nexus along with Charlotte Babasso, and so Chris and Charlotte and I at Nexus started talking about things that we could possibly make together. So and that has been really cool. Along with the other thing that I kind of did when we moved back into LA, and we moved in with my wife's parents for a couple months before while we're looking for a house here. And I set up in his garage, in Bob's garage, next to his home grow operation. And
okay.
So I always had, like, behind me in video calls for May and June, there was, you know, grow lights and some plants, and which is always fun. But in that garage, I also kind of set up my my Vive, you know, VR stuff, because I've been into that for a while, and I decided to start to learn Blender because all the kids were learning Blender, and Maya's for old people now, right? And
yep.
And I had tried to learn Blender a couple times before, but the 2.8 version, the EV real time stuff, the grease pencil, like storyboards in 3D, all those things kind of added up to, like, okay, now it's really starting to be powerful and useful and easier interface wise. So I've completely fallen in love with doing everything that way as far as animation and story goes, and modeling and all that. And then and then I also started thinking about you know, working or doing the AR kit, like puppeteering, if I'd be able to, like, figure that stuff out. So in May, I kind of made a couple characters work with AR kit puppeteering, you know, using an iPad to drive Blender characters, and got really excited about how easy it was and how it's, like, such a neat start for animation. It doesn't get you, like, it's not getting you Pixar quality facial animation by any means, but you get something kind of interesting and cool and timed right. And so I started playing around with that, and Nexus is great as a company because they're in between. You know, they're very creative, artistic company, and very have a lot of integrity in the image, but they also are a technology company and mess around with that in a cool way. So we ended up, you know, Nexus had been involved with Unreal Engine, as are many companies right now, and trying to figure out how it might be interesting. And we kind of partnered with them to do, you know, what I had been playing with Feast and with Paperman, these different looks. Is that something that we could actually, like, engineer into a real-time system? Because there's no reason to spend your, you know, so much render time on things that don't need all that fancy bounce light, you know. And it's definitely been like challenging because Unreal has so many, all these real-time engines have so many efficiencies built into them that are based on realism. So if you're wanting to break things away from realism, you tend to be kind of breaking down the efficiencies that the engine has in the first place, which makes non-photoreal a little harder than you think it should be in real-time engines. But we've been playing around with that and come up with some cool, I've made like a 3-minute like teaser film for a story idea called This Tape Deck is a Time Machine that we are, currently working out how to make. And I think it's going to be really, really awesome to actually get things out there and working that way. And in my little keynote next week, I'll have some stuff to show from that.
Awesome.
Should be cool. So, and that's just, and there's that. I also, I have a mega grant myself from Unreal that I'm working on a virtual improv theater where many people can perform in their own houses together in a remote session on the cloud, and it takes suggestions live from the audience and like drop in props and sets and stuff and actually do like a theater show live on the internet, like streamed. So I'm in the middle of making that with my partners at the studio. I did the Google project with called Evil Eye Studios in San Francisco too. So I've been dabbling in various versions of real time, along with trying to pitch and make TV shows and movies on my own, like doing normal development stuff. And in that regard, there's I'm doing something with real effects there in development that I think is really amazing, and they're actually doing a lot of cool real time stuff too. So like I feel like it's in the zeitgeist to be doing this stuff in real time, and I like it because I bring it back to like I love figure painting, I love alla prima style portrait painting and landscape art, which is you sit down with nothing, you sketch it, you paint wet on wet, and you interact with the finished image as you work. And animation has this traditionally has a very throw it over the wall to the next apartment kind of workflow that doesn't have a lot of flow in it. It doesn't have a lot of moments where you disappear into the work and see the work as finished as it can possibly be, where you're actually making creative choices that bounce off the finished idea. And I think real time brings that back into the process in a cool way. So I'm always looking for ways to kind of be able to lose yourself in the performance a little bit or in the craft. And I think that it's really cool to be able to start to do that with these tools. And I'm really tool agnostic. I don't really care. I just want the flow to be there and the interactivity. Like I was the animator who really hated a slow rig. Like I would just stop. I would just guys, the rig's too slow. I quit. I'm done. Not working on this. And because you just it's not fun to wait to not to have an idea. And then the concentration required there is not for me. I got so many things going through my head that I need to be held in the moment. If anything interrupts, having to play blast, it's lost time, So. And I was a decently fast animator, but I think people could be way faster if all the real time stuff is working. So most rigs now, studios have figured out how to multi-thread and kind of geocache things that aren't changing and all of that. So Disney and Pixar rigs are pretty fast and almost real time for the most part. But I think getting lighting in there too and all of that will be pretty exciting. So. We'll see how that all goes for the feature side.
Well, listen, because there's a chance this could crash again, and I don't want that to happen, I'd like to find out, tell us a little bit about that story that you were about to tell me about what you're doing with the Love, Death, and Robots stuff. You're kind of involved in that right now a little bit, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, in May, I talked to Tim Miller, just in general, and he asked if I would be willing to do an episode of Love, Death, Robots, and the show was incredible. I'm super excited to be making one of those. I am it's so hard to get all like adult animation, like animation that's not aimed at families or kids made. I was incredibly impressed that Tim was able to make that happen and push it through, and they're a really great team to work with and very efficient and to the point in a great way. And it's different than other stuff I've done where the script was done. This is, it was already written. It was an idea that it's the second version of an idea, essentially, and that doesn't happen for an animation director very long. For a project to come along that is really good scripts, blessed all the way to the top as being a good script, something they want to make, and it just needs to be made. So there was no way I was not going to jump on something like that, out of the respect for the series in general, wanting to be a part, and the fact that like that normal director writer work of like just wrestling over the concept for years and years was not going to happen. So that's, but that's, it's a short, so it's not a full-time thing. We're making that with Blow in Spain, awesome company. So those are my mornings. My mornings are talking to Alejandro at Blow, who is running the show there for, half hour, an hour. And then I'm also, I'm writing a show, or writing a special for Apple that is going to be cool and non-photoreal and like a half hour to 40-minute thing that I'm very excited about. And but those things, like I've kind of learned to believe that, like, I don't make a lot of announcements on Twitter and stuff, only because like when things are like on the screen in the movie theater or on TV, then you finished them. You got there. There are so many things that could go wrong in between that for me, it's just like, it's very important to try to like just enjoy the work every day, what you're doing. I think the reward for like doing a good job is, if you love your job, is doing more. I do believe that's true. So, I do like that I'm able to do that and keep, writing or drawing or whatever, pitching ideas, I'm excited about, I think we're going to hit a new television style of animation kind of soon. That's going to be like a weird hybrid of puppetry and CG, like there's enough things happening like this where like I've seen a few tests of CG and puppetry kind of mixed. And I think there's, in the fact that like a lot of 2D animation looks very similar. It's all kind of a descendant of The Simpsons in some way. It's on TV. I think the audiences will like gravitate towards some cool looking new stuff. And, Robot Chickens, those guys are out there, obviously. Yeah. But there's room. I think there's room for like shows that feel different there. So I'm excited whether or not I get to make one or someone else does. I think we're heading towards a cool way of mixing some of these real-time tools and like miniature sets and puppets and stuff in a cool way. We'll see. I don't know. I've seen a few like really exciting companies out there doing stuff. It's tough to get stuff greenlit and finally made. There's a lot of development time and a lot of just figuring it out and making pitch decks. And that's kind of what my days are right now is writing ideas, working on the Unreal Engine stuff, having fun with that, tinkering, filling the gear guy sort of, drive, but also trying to like land those bigger things that will really make an impact. So, for
sure. Well, that's really awesome. I really appreciate those stories. I mean, animators to me like have always been like the part of the CG world that I'm just out of touch from because it is very different.
My wife says the animators, if the CG studio, if the animation studio is a high school, the animators are the football team in the good and bad ways.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And
but I also noticed,
and I'm also
and
insulted,
sometimes,
but, yeah.
and sometimes animators, I mean, animators are not necessarily very technical. You know, I've known animators and barely use their email, but they're excellent animators. And that's because it's got a special part of their brain that works that way. So it's always been a kind of a nice thing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, story artists are the extreme version of that too. They're like the least technical people, but super creative. And it's a tricky, I don't know, it's a animation like is insanely hard for so long. And then one day it clicks and everything just becomes like a real clear amount of time to finish, but you know you can get there. But it's like you don't finish school feeling that way. You work for like 5 or 6, 7 years professionally. You still feel like it's hard. And then there's one day where it just becomes like, it's still hard to come up with original ideas and to do something special, but like the actual technical side of it disappears a lot. And it just takes, I think it takes that 10,000 hours of doing it. But and so I still love animating. It's not like I fear writing. It's hard. Like writing, like the blank page, coming up with something good that comes from you internally is like, you don't really know you're going to get there. With animating, I'm at a spot where I know if I sit down and spend the time, I can make it look great. So I just think it just takes like the years and years of work doing it, getting past the technical spot of doing it. But I don't know if writing ever gets that way. Or coming up with great stories, it's the constant like chase of something completely original. It's very hard, and and very satisfying in the same way. And I think that's why people like take the torture, because the small wins are pretty nice. And I didn't mention it during like the feast side of things, but for me the real joy of like the only moment in directing and writing and making stuff that I feel is like really, really joyful is when you're recording the score, because it's the first moment where you have like, there's so much incredible talent that's brought to this one room at one time, and you see what's pretty much your finished film on the wall behind them, and you see people working at the top of their game, and you're it's like outside of your skill set in a great way where you can actually enjoy it for an afternoon. And like, it's the most amazing part. It's like you sit down there, and for Feast, Alex Ebert did the music. He's the singer of Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros, and he's a wonderful composer. And to see that guy like write that music, in a weekend, and then put it up with an orchestra. The horn player played the solo in Jurassic Park theme, like the same person. Like, it's really cool to like sit in the room and get to see that. So there are these little moments that make it all of the difficulty worth that. But it's rare to get to even have those moments. So, but I still love doing it. So I guess there's some bit of torture that everyone kind of likes,
Yeah. Well, it's creative. It's creative.
Yeah. It's always,
for sure.
It's never boring. It's fascinating.
Yep.
And, that's just the creative side. All of the studio stuff and the politics is like equally weird and fascinating. And, it's only talked about in memoirs because, everybody's still working, and you have to make sure you don't say anything bad, but, that's all interesting too. So, but yeah, that's why I think the real time stuff is so exciting for the future of making work. I love what all these high power renderers do. They make things look beautiful, but the faster the better, for sure. Just because it gets you back into that artistic state.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's feedback too. You get a feedback loop that's much more enjoyable than waiting.
Yeah. I mean,
For sure.
Hats off to some of the Blue Sky lighters who worked. Like, CG Studio was an incredible system, but man, it did not have an interface for a long, long time. And it's pretty amazing to see people who can like work in their heads so well with text. You know,
Yep. I couldn't do it.
The procedural side of Blue Sky was unbelievable for some of the people there. What they could do with those, coded tools. It was super cool and impressive.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick. I really appreciate it. And, I look forward to this will come out absolutely after the real-time conference, but I look forward to hanging out with you next week online, virtually,
Yeah.
and we can, we can see what's going on during the real-time conference. But it's been awesome hanging out with you, hearing your story, seeing the work you've done. It's very inspiring. Kenner Toys is a great place to start your inspiration. We always talk about how important that company was creatively for our generation, for sure.
I think, the Kenner is a spot of the change of intellectual property from no value to a ton of value, but at the same time, it's also the unification of all of our childhoods in the world into something that everyone kind of has together. Which right. I think that's kind of a neat thing that's happened. So it took my dad a while to come around to that idea. He used to say he makes landfill, but he's kind of come around, I think, to appreciating the cultural impact. Also, he's gone to a few conventions and been worshipped there, and that did it, I think.
Okay.
In a cute way. So yeah, thanks for talking, and I'll. See you around virtually, even though you only live 10 minutes away, I guess.
I know, but I'm not really visiting anyone at all. Mm-hmm. Which is fine. The only place I go to is the beach to go fishing. But I will, but at some point, maybe we can meet up since we're just 10 minutes away.
All right. Nice talking.
Have a good one, Patrick.
See you
Thank
later.
you.
Bye.